BingX, a trusted global crypto exchange. Trade spot, futures, or copy top traders easily. Sign up via the link or referral code to get 30 USDT instantly, plus up to 1,500 USDT in bonuses for verification, deposit, and trading.
Israel has placed new restrictions on humanitarian aid entering Gaza, a move that immediately tests a fragile ceasefire and raises concerns about the fate of remaining hostages. On Tuesday, authorities announced that the flow of essential supplies into the devastated Palestinian territory would be halved. This significant reduction comes alongside the unexpected closure of the crucial Rafah border crossing with Egypt, a key artery for aid distribution. Israel cited delays in the return of the bodies of hostages held by Hamas as the primary reason for these stringent measures. The militant group had, on Tuesday night, handed over the remains of 4 hostages to the International Committee of the Red Cross. This brings the total number of deceased hostages whose bodies have been transferred to 8 since the United States-brokered ceasefire took effect. However, with 20 hostages still unaccounted for, the situation remains deeply tense. Hamas claims it is encountering obstacles, stating that not all burial sites have been identified. The Red Cross, which is overseeing the repatriation of remains, had previously warned on Monday that the process was a massive challenge. They highlighted the immense difficulty in locating bodies amidst the extensive rubble in Gaza, predicting that the retrieval could take days, if not weeks. Despite these challenges, Israel has responded with decisive action, accusing Hamas of deliberate stalling tactics. The decision to cut aid shipments to a mere 300 trucks per day, and the postponement of the Rafah crossing's opening, represent a clear departure from the terms of the ceasefire agreement, brokered by former President Donald Trump. This agreement, which had facilitated the release of the last 20 living Israeli hostages by Hamas on Monday, along with the freeing of nearly 2,000 Palestinians from Israeli custody and a partial Israeli troop withdrawal from Gaza, now appears to be on precarious ground. The subsequent phases of the truce, aimed at consolidating peace, are evidently fraught with peril. The call from families of deceased hostages for the United States to leave no stone unturned in efforts to secure the return of all captives underscores the immense pressure on all parties involved. Former President Trump himself urged Hamas to release the remaining bodies, emphasizing its necessity for advancing the next stages of the Gaza plan. He declared on social media that the job was far from over, as the dead had not been returned as promised, and that Phase 2 begins right now. Early tensions within the ceasefire framework were widely anticipated, as both Hamas and Israel jockeyed for position during the implementation of the loosely defined 20-point plan. Nevertheless, the decision to curtail aid and delay the opening of Rafah has come as a significant shock. The crossing was scheduled to open on Wednesday, aligning with an agreement reached last week that envisioned a substantial increase in aid, mirroring levels seen during a brief ceasefire in March. During the height of the conflict, Israel had severely restricted entry and exit routes, largely cutting off essential supplies like food and medicine, which tragically led to widespread famine across much of Gaza. The ceasefire blueprint also stipulated the return of all hostages, alive and deceased, within 72 hours of the agreement's acceptance. Crucially, it included a contingency mechanism. If this timeline was not met, Hamas was expected to share information regarding any remaining deceased hostages and exert maximum effort to ensure the fulfillment of these commitments as soon as possible. Ella Haimi, whose husband Tal Haimi was killed during the October 7 Hamas attack on kibbutz near Yitzhak, expressed support for the pressure being applied through humanitarian aid restrictions. She stated her belief that Hamas was not making its best effort, despite receiving information from the Israeli army. Haimi asserted that control over the number of trucks entering Gaza provides leverage that must be utilized. Furthermore, she indicated that the Israeli government should not, and would not, proceed to Phase 2 of the peace plan until all deceased hostages were returned. Following the celebrations that marked the hostage releases on Monday, tensions escalated throughout the day with sporadic acts of violence reported in Gaza. Israeli forces, having withdrawn from Gaza City and other areas on Saturday, reportedly opened fire on civilians approaching their positions on 2 separate occasions, resulting in fatalities. Under the ceasefire terms, Israeli forces have retreated to a designated yellow line, but still maintain a significant presence, controlling slightly over half of Gaza. Mahmoud Basal, a spokesperson for the Gaza Civil Defense Agency, confirmed that 5 people were killed by drones while inspecting their homes in the Shujaiya district of Gaza City, and another person died in a drone strike southeast of Khan Yunis. The Israeli military maintained that its forces opened fire only after issuing repeated warnings to suspects who were identified as threats after approaching their positions. In the second incident, the strike targeted a former Hamas arms cache. Hazem Qassem, a Hamas spokesperson, denounced these shootings as violations of the ceasefire, accusing Israel of attempting to evade its commitments to mediators. Further reports emerged of shootings, beatings, and firefights across various parts of Gaza as Hamas continued its efforts to reassert its authority. Armed fighters were observed on the streets, targeting individuals opposed to their continued rule or perceived as aligned with Israel. A disturbing video circulated late on Monday depicted Hamas fighters dragging 7 men, with their hands bound, into a Gaza City square. They were forced to their knees and shot from behind, while dozens of onlookers watched from nearby storefronts. Former President Trump has reportedly given his endorsement for Hamas to temporarily regain some control in Gaza. Israeli officials, however, who insist on the permanent disarmament of Hamas in any final settlement, have yet to make a public statement regarding the reappearance of the group's fighters. On Tuesday night, Trump reiterated his stance, telling reporters that Hamas would be compelled to lay down its weapons, stating, "If they don't disarm, we will disarm them, and it will happen quickly and perhaps violently." The delay in opening the Rafah crossing has caused considerable dismay among humanitarian officials in Gaza, who report that only limited supplies have entered the territory since the ceasefire agreement was finalized. The United Nations indicated that tents for displaced families, frozen meat, fresh fruit, flour, and medicines were delivered on Saturday. However, on Monday, no trucks entered from Israel due to the passage of freed hostages, and Tuesday was a Jewish religious holiday, leading to the closure of crossings. Amjad al-Shawa, director of the Palestinian NGO network, expressed concern over the lack of significant change on the ground, particularly in the north, where essential services, tents, water, and heavy equipment are desperately needed. He emphasized that the situation required everything, basically, and that a flood of aid had not materialized. On Tuesday, a Gaza hospital reported receiving the bodies of 45 Palestinians returned by Israel. The agreement also stipulated that Israel would provide information regarding the remains of Palestinians who died in Israeli custody. Attention is now shifting towards the establishment of a transitional authority in Gaza and a multinational stabilization force, as outlined in the deal. Both initiatives are to be ultimately overseen by a board of peace, chaired by former President Trump and potentially led by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Badr Abdelhadi, the Egyptian foreign minister, confirmed that 15 Palestinian technocrats have been selected to administer Gaza, with approval from all Palestinian factions, including Hamas, and vetting by Israel. Abdelhadi stressed the urgency of deploying these technocrats to manage the daily lives of Gazans and highlighted the role of the Board of Peace in supporting and supervising the flow of financial aid designated for Gaza.